Welcome to the Silver Room, our last Silver Room of 2025. My name is Julia Lee Landry, and I have the honor of chatting today with two impressive fiction writers, Nola Femino and Morgan Hufstader. If you've been following Silver Room, you know how this goes. We'll hear each author read, then I'll interview each of them, and we'll end with some questions that apply to both of our readers and both of their works. Nola, Morgan, are y'all ready to show these people what you can do?
Ready
Fantastic.
to rock and roll.
Awesome. Nola Femino is a fiction writer from Iowa City, Iowa. She is currently in her first year of pursuing an MFA at the University of New Orleans. Nola, this is my first time getting to engage with your writing, but I am so excited to have you share this story with our audience. Please take us away.
Thank you. So this is called The Moss Man, and here we go. Gwen wasn't entirely sure what she had expected Josh to look like, but it certainly wasn't this. In all honesty, as they'd been emailing, she'd pictured the man as a little blue post-it note. Josh obviously was not a post-it note, but rather a tall, lanky loser, somehow possessing both extremely skinny legs and the pudging promises of a beer belly. He had long blonde hair with horizontal skunk stripes and a single earring with a purple feather dangling from it. His eyes were too far apart, his mouth was too big, and he was overall quite a startling sight to Gwen. Gwennington, Gwenethy, Gwenderational trauma. Nice to meet you, lady. She was, in all senses of the word, appalled. But then again, since she'd quit her day job, Gwen found that she was almost always appalled. Without the pressures of a 9 to 5, Gwen discovered that she had much more time for her true passion. That is, being egregiously offended at everything. She'd made the switch in an effort to rediscover herself, although it was really more of a knee-jerk response to the vicious onset of menopause and the creeping midlife crisis she found herself in. At 40, her unmarriedness screamed a little louder than the other parts of her identity, thanks to the repeating calls from her mother that mainly focused on how she was going to die without grandkids. Plus, after one of the new hires at her job, a sprightly young blonde fresh out of college, assumed incorrectly and asked Gwen what her husband did for work, Gwen decided that it was a pertinent decision to remove herself from any other potentially damaging situations. Mr. Kramer, nice to meet you, Gwen said, although it was in fact not nice to meet him, and she felt rather guilty for lying. She sent a silent apology to her turtle, whom she often chastised for the same sin. Who's a hungry boy? She would ask, speaking as if talking to a dog or a small child. The turtle, being a turtle, would refuse Gwen the satisfaction of a response, to which Gwen would reply, Now, James, don't lie. I know you're hungry. She felt that even though he was not a talker, she'd done her utmost to raise him to be a contributive member of society. Yes, you should be confused because he's a turtle and therefore contributes very little. The man in front of her, however, Gwen could tell, had not had the same amount of nurturing that she'd bestowed upon her son, yes, the turtle, and thus she tried not to be too appalled because she knew firsthand just how difficult motherhood could be. Nice to meet you too, Josh said. I'm excited to go track down this mossy son of a moss. Josh was often a few decibels too loud, not enough to where it would be publicly excusable for someone to comment, but enough that he frequently received odd looks from his conversational partners, much like the one Gwen was giving him now. Yes, well, we're just going to take a few pictures, Gwen sniffed, for proof. Sure are, said Josh, as he pulled out what Gwen thought looked like a shotgun from the back of his beaten-up dark blue van. Great heavens, Mr. Kramer, what is that? Don't worry, lady, it's just a midline trank gun, nothing too serious. Just in case the old moss tries anything. It was, in fact, not a trank gun, but rather a Nerf Elite Eagle Point 2.0, which looked more like a space blaster from a bad 2000s movie than an actual firearm. Josh didn't really get out a lot, and his mother, a darling but quite overbearing woman, had gifted the toy gun to Josh for Christmas last year, and having never used it except for that one incident with the neighbor's dog, he decided that this was the perfect time to load the treasure with styrofoam bullets. His interactions with women were few, and thus he left his mother's house this morning, determined to look as cool as humanly possible. Well, said Gwen, her metaphorical feathers ruffled, I suppose it's better safe than sorry. Sure is, lady. He twirled the gun, almost dropped it, but made a quick recovery by catching it and flipping it up towards his too big mouth, blowing imaginary smoke off the barrel like he was James Bond. Let's do this thing. And off they went into the woods in search of the Moss Man. Before we go any further, I suppose the elephant in the room should be addressed. Or, well, the Moss Man in the room. Because one could imagine that if the Moss Man, hidden in the trees, was viewing these two walking, Josh with his skunk-striped hair and Gwen with her smart shoes from Kohl's, he'd be utterly confused and equally intrigued as to how they met. Which brings us to the unfortunate topic of Mr. Kramer's blog. After failing too many times in the job market to even classify as an underdog, and upon receiving a pep talk from his mother that went something like, You just got so much potential, baby cakes, Josh decided that it was best if he was his own boss. Thus, he settled on the humble life of a cryptid blogger, that is, finding myths and blowing them out of proportion with wildly inaccurate facts. His most recent find was a hefty piece of lore that stemmed from the woods of eastern Iowa. The Moss Man's original story told the tale of how a careless hiker littered and set the poor man's house and wife and children on fire. Wrought with despair at the death of everyone he loved, the Moss Man lay on the forest floor to die. The animals of the forest, overcome with grief for the area's newest and most eligible bachelor, covered his body in magic moss that worked its way into his pores like one of those expensive Korean face masks. Thus, the Moss Man was born. Unfortunately, as the story twisted throughout the years, his existence settled on being used as unsexily as possible. That is, to warn children who went to summer camps not to litter. Josh, of course, being the opportunist that he was, took this story and ran with it. He spun a tale of the Mossman being shot but not wounded, and was now on the run after committing heinous crimes. He expected the usual white ladies with too much time commenting on his posts about how he was poisoning the internet, all press is good press, and the few loyal fanatics. What he wasn't expecting was for a woman to email him with a story of her own, corroborating his point that what the people of North Liberty, Iowa had thought to be a friendly, Smokey Bear-esque figure was actually a murderous, evil spirit. I saw him, Gwen had written in her email. I saw the Moss Man, and we should be afraid. This got Josh's heart pumping. Had he actually been right about his cryptids for once? Was he maybe not such a failure? And, most importantly, was he potentially going to get to interact with a woman who wasn't his mother? Gwen's emails had been equally chilling and passionate, explaining that after a traumatic event during summer camp that the Moss Man had haunted her. Plus, being recently unemployed meant that Gwen had ample time to ruminate on her childhood, a frightening and uncomfortable pastime. Your article gave me hope, she wrote. Maybe with enough proof we could convince the community that he's real, that he's a threat, that he would eat Smokey Bear like my mother at an Arby's drive-thru. Josh was both intrigued and hopeful. Being right about his conspiracies had the potential to launch his blog from its suffering state to a lofty community-wide fame. Thus, our two heroes set a time and place to meet and ventured into the woods for proof that the Moss Man existed. Let's catch back up with them, shall we? So, Mr. Kramer, Gwen asked, gingerly stepping over branches, what do you do for a living? What do I do, lady? This is what I do. You regularly go traipsing through the woods? Well, I wouldn't say regularly, Josh said, and, feeling brave, added, and never with such beautiful women. Gwen, despite herself, blushed. They were silent for a moment. It was one of those awkward pauses when each person desperately wants to say something, anything, because there's not quite enough of a connection to sit comfortably with silence. Even if that means blurting out the embarrassing fact that their mom still does their laundry sometimes, or that they can't remember the last time they cleaned the hair out of their drain. Anything to stop the awkwardness from growing, a bubble begging to burst. Josh cracked first. So what's the deal with you and the old Moss, he asked. What's the big story? The trauma. Although Gwen would have normally felt appalled at such a prying question, she found herself surprisingly warm to answering. Well, she said, I was 10 years old. It was a summer camp. I'd snuck off with a friend to see the Raptor Center. Have you seen the Raptor Center? Josh shook his head no. Well, you should. Maybe we could go together sometime. Or, shocked and appalled that she had just accidentally, or not so accidentally, asked this man on a date, Gwen blurted out at a level that was unusually loud for her. Anyways, we got lost and he cornered us in the forest. The Moss Man came to kill me and he dropped a tree on us and there was a tornado and I don't remember. Well, he tried to kill us, that's all. She ended this last part in a high-pitched shriek. Mortified, Gwen turned a ripe shade of red that matched the dangling branch of an oak to her right. Little did she know, Josh had just experienced his first feelings of love for a woman who was not his mother. Never had he heard someone speak at the same volume he did, just a little too loud, a little too breathless, like the words couldn't escape fast enough. Gwen, I'm so sorry to hear that, he said earnestly. Now Josh's face went red at such a calm display of emotion, so unusual from his normal bravado, which he used with the gumption of an all-you-can-eat buffet. That is to say, too much, too fast, leaving you queasy and winded after. Alas, little did he know that Gwen was now feeling her first feelings of love for a man who wasn't a turtle. She couldn't remember the last time someone had been so genuine. Hell, she told James, her turtle child, everything, and he never so much as gave her a reassuring pat on the hand. Sometimes he just hid in his shell. With little smiles on their faces, they both glanced at each other and then looked away, all normal awkwardness now giving way to an awkwardness that was not so normal and rather raw. As they continued to walk, Gwen's normally stiff shoulders relaxed a bit, and Josh's grip loosened on his Nerf gun. The air wasn't so tense now, but as they walked in semi-comfortable silence, each of them lost in their own romantical thoughts, they forgot that they were indeed walking through a forest. That's when Gwen, despite the smartness of her shoes, tripped on a branch that she hadn't seen obscuring her path. Now, one could imagine if the Moss Man was viewing these two from the trees, he would have seen this play out in slow motion. Oh, great heavens! She yelled as she slowly fell to the forest floor. Josh, forgetting the Moss Man mission and thinking only of Gwen, threw his Nerf gun aside and swooped in to catch her. Without thought, without trying too hard, Josh caught Gwen in a perfect lunge, his skinny legs quaking from the effort, but holding up nonetheless. Oh, Gwen said with a sigh. Oh, Mr. Kramer. Oh, Gwen. One would imagine that if the Moss Man were viewing these two, that this would be about the time he would turn away or close his eyes to give our two late bloomers the privacy they both deserve. One would imagine the Moss Man would do such a thing. But this story really isn't about the Moss Man, is it? Thank you.
I was not expecting you to do those voices, and that was absolutely delightful to listen to with a equally delightful, ominous ending. So thank you so much for that reading, Nola.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
Now we are going to have another story from Morgan. Morgan Hufstader is originally from New York, but now has roots in New Orleans, where she is acquiring her MFA at the Creative Writing Workshop at the University of New Orleans. Her works have appeared in the Saints and Sinners LGBTQ plus fiction anthology, Sinister Wisdom, and Zoetic Press. She enjoys writing queer stories with sharp teeth and lifting up her local literary community. She is currently working on a novel. Morgan, I have always enjoyed your work in the past, so let's give our audience that same delight.
Yay. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Julia. Thanks for that reading, Nola. I've heard it before and it makes me so happy every time. That was just so much joy. All right. So this is a short story that I worked on. This is actually the very end of the short story, but that's always the best part anyway. So not a lot of exposition needed here. I'm just going to dive in. The short story is called Don't Choke. Marigold was lost in her head on the drive back. We didn't talk, and every now and then her hand would vanish under her ball cap, and she'd tug out a strand of hair, which she'd then lose to the wind, catch and release. When we got back to Louisiana, my phone buzzed with a text from my landlord. The message had no words, just a question mark. I left it unread. Rent was overdue, and I had $13 in my checking account. Marigold dropped me off at my apartment. I mimed fitting my key in my lock, but once her car was out of sight, I stepped off the porch and crossed the street to the Last Stop Tavern. It was 2 p.m. on a Sunday, and there were a handful of patrons, some loitering at the bar, some punching the machines in the back, everyone sweating under the motionless summer heat. David was there. He had a loose linen shirt on, and he was scrolling through his phone, a half-drunk beer in front of him. If there's a protocol to spending time with the man whose wife you've been having an affair with all weekend, I didn't know it. Instead, I pulled up a stool and sat across from him. Hey, I said, you're back. He looked up from his phone and put his phone face down on the table. Work wrapped up early. I got back yesterday. Huh. My heart did a skittish little fox hop. Hey, have you heard from Marigold? He sounded so earnest, I felt like rubbing my own face in it. Maybe she's cheating on you, I said. Jesus, he scolded. Don't say that. So I shut up about it. As a rule, I don't think people should be forced to live in a reality that doesn't serve them. He waved his hand toward the bar. Help yourself. I've got a tab going. I went to the bar, rearranged my poker face, and ordered a beer. Joe poured the beer and put it in front of me, but the thought of sharing space on David's bar tab made me feel sick. The same way Brian doing puzzles with glazed over eyes at our parents' house made me feel sick, and Marigold's anxiously plucking out strands of her own hair made me feel sick. So I pulled out my card and handed it over to Joe. I told him to put my beer on it and David's. He tried it and handed it back. He said, "It won't run. You got something else?" My gaze fell to the fishbowl at the back of the bar. An amputated thumb jerked and wiggled in the water, pushing back and forth by tiny jets. It bounced against the glass and soundlessly rolled backwards. I'll have a hitchhiker shot, I said. Joe blinked. It's 2 p.m., he said, as if there was a reasonable time to take a shot with an amputated thumb. Give me the hitchhiker shot, I insisted. Joe frowned, but then got out a wide shot glass. One hitchhiker shot, he announced loudly. Coming up. A couple of patrons looked up. David moved from the table to the bar, fitting himself in beside me. Holy shit, David said. Are you serious? Joe filled the shot glass with gin. Then he pulled on a yellow glove and reached into the jug. He fished out the thumb and dropped it into the glass. He recited the rules. Drink the gin, kiss the thumb, drinks around the house for the night. Got it? I nodded. Got it. He set the shot glass in front of me. I picked up the glass and tilted it. The thumb was black where it had been severed. It had wrinkled and withered like a rotten banana. My stomach pinched. David grinned. He took out his phone and started filming. You crazy motherfucker, he said. Don't choke, I thought. Whatever you do, don't choke. I knocked the shot back, and when the cool leathered skin touched my lips, I opened my mouth wider. The thumb felt thick and bulbous, and I snake swallowed it down. The end.
Hitchhiker shot in gin, no less. Man, while I choke that down, let's turn back to Nola to talk about the Moss Man. So I'm going to start by stating the obvious. Your story is funny. It
Thank you.
revels in its humor. We have two screwball characters falling in love, and we have a narrative voice that serves as its own kind of comedic character. Knowing that this excerpt, I believe, is part of a larger narrative with some horror elements, why do you think comedy and horror pair so well together? What made you choose that combination, and why is it generally a successful choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, the longer work, I will say, doesn't play as much into the horror as maybe it probably could. And it's more that I really wanted to like put them in this situation that feels kind of innocuous, but also has that ominous sense of it where they're walking through the woods, they don't know what's happening, and just think, what are the two most ridiculous people that would have no reason to meet other than like to seek out this one crazy thing, and how are they going to interact? That was really what I was trying to do with that. And I don't really write a ton of horror. I will say this is probably more horror than I've ever written, and it's not horror at all. But I think to your point, the humor and it goes well together, because it allows that breath, of kind of freshness, and you're not maybe gripping the table in the way that other pieces might, which I like. I can't watch scary movies; they freak me out. So for me, the horror and the humor works because it allows you to breathe a little bit. Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And just from what little else of the story I did read, I would say you did horror pretty well in
Well,
that
thank you.
other excerpt. So just, know that.
Well, thank you.
Your narrative voice here, though, from what I read, does not particularly like these two characters, at least not until the end when the characters start to like one another. So talk to me a little bit about this tactic of allowing the reader to feel some antagonistic feelings toward these characters at the start and then letting the narrative voice like endorse that antagonism. Why is it that I feel the most sympathy for Gwen's poor turtle, and why does that work here so well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think honestly, I wanted to play around with having that. I've been reading a lot of my classics lately. So Jane Austen, when she steps away and she'll poke fun at people, that always really inspires me. So I did want to play around with that a bit. And I mean, she has tender moments with some characters, and then other times with the same characters, she'll kind of give it to them. So I think I wanted to play around a little bit with that, yes, and kind of give the reader space to, I mean, they're both flawed people. In the longer work, you get more into their backstories and kind of why they are the way they are. And just kind of give the reader to not have to sympathize with them right off the bat. Maybe poke a little fun at them, and then maybe say that, oh, I can see maybe a tiny bit of myself in both of them, which maybe isn't the most comfortable thing, but it makes me also want to root for them too. Yeah.
Well, and I think that also heightens the absurdity a little bit, right? Like I
Yeah.
see this happening in Jane Austen. I also see it happening in a lot of like capital A absurd pieces. So it just I feel like it works really well, and I was glad to see someone playing with that. For this next question, you don't necessarily have to spoil anything, but I am curious, where is this story heading? What do you envision it doing, covering, resolving? What kinds of themes are you addressing in that larger piece? And what is your like motivating curiosity, your driving interest?
It's a great question. In the longer work, it actually kind of goes backwards a little bit rather than forward. So they end up meeting. But in the longer work, you get more of them kind of on their own and why they are the way they are. And I think what I wanted to do, I guess the driving reason behind it is I wanted to take two people who would maybe look at each other and say, we're completely different. We would never interact. I think they're both kind of judgy. And then realize that maybe they're just on opposite ends of like a little horseshoe spectrum where they're right next to each other. Um, and kind of have them be separate. And then once you see them together, you can start picking out. Gwen has an overbearing mother, and so does Josh, but you don't really see it until you're going to put them together. Um, so in the piece kind of takes that, but it backfills it a little bit. Um, yeah, and I've written about 7 versions of this. So honestly, I'm not sure where it's gonna land right now. But right now, that's where it's landing. So TBD might change, but yeah.
I think that's a fantastic motivation, right? I mean, showing the commonalities between superficially different characters, and how much, again, that horseshoe that you were talking about, like that is so perfect, as a backing for a fiction story. So I'm excited to see future drafts and future revisions.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn back to Morgan now to discuss Don't Choke for a little bit. So, with an ending like that, I have to ask you about the surreal. As we are reading your story, we're progressing forward with one set of expectations, only to arrive somewhere very unexpected. What satisfies you as an author in tilting a reader's understanding of the world off balance? What do you think makes that kind of movement in a story so satisfying for the reader?
Yeah, that is like I would say my favorite reader reaction. Is if someone's reading something I write and they've got that kind of like, oh, what? Like of all reactions, like the laughter, the crying, the feeling, like the surprise. I think that's one of my favorites. So for this story in particular, so it follows Bridget, who's kind of she has sort of like the stuck in Louisiana summer heat. She's feeling money issues. She's having an affair with one of her friend's wives. She's just kind of like it's this. The story is this constant build of tension, this constant build of and her brother just suffered a mental lapse. So constant build of things going wrong in her life, some out of her control, some very much self-sabotagey. So, although the ending does feel like a shock, it should also feel like there's no other way to go. Like we've been building towards this through the whole story. And I think that's what's most satisfying is when it's something that surprises you, but something that felt like this was we had to get here. Like it had to culminate into something wild, like swallowing a toe, so or a thumb or whatever you want to swallow. So yeah, I think that's what's satisfying to me about that.
Something floating and jerking dismembered in a fishbowl, which I think that image is just going to live with me for the rest of my life. So thank you very much for that. Uh, I do also want to talk to you about tone. Even in this like surreal ending of this story, you're occupying a very matter-of-fact tone, letting the language purposefully dull that bizarre in a way that makes the bizarre even more interesting through understatement. Were you thinking consciously about tone when writing this story, or is it something that just came naturally from your general approach to the piece? Are there any thoughts on why that tension between language and content makes writing more memorable?
Spoken like a poet. um, about language and tone. Yeah, I think I guess for me it was more like like that was the character's voice in my head. She just kind of has this very dry sort of um, everything's falling apart around her, and she's kind of trying to like horse with blinders, like muscle through it. That's kind of like the play on the don't choke. It's just this feeling of the world is falling apart, but you have to keep above water. So I think that the tone of being sort of dry and being like singularly focused, and not letting everything overwhelm you. Like there's sort of like a forced focus to the way she speaks and the way she sees the world. And so I think that kind of like creates some of the almost dramatic irony of things exploding around you and you're trying to stay level. So I guess that's where that came from, like that kind of level-headed ness to it. More character voice than um, you know leveling out the tension, but I guess that served both points.
Yeah, I think it works really well, and I always love when something comes from like a character first place. And it feels right for this story. My last question specifically about Don't Choke, and I'm mostly just asking this for myself, even though I'm sure the audience is curious too. And you've addressed this a little bit in what you were saying earlier. I know this is the end of the short story, but will I get a chance to return to this world with severed thumbs in shot glasses? Like, I feel like that detail gives me so many questions about the larger universe, and I just want more in a world that has this going on. So, do you have any plans for something like that?
Oh, well, the funny thing is, it's just the world is New Orleans. It's just kind of like this, this place where things are permitted that perhaps should not be permitted. This kind of surreal sort of landscape sometimes. At least in my experience is that, in a wonderful way, sometimes you feel like things are just, you know, bizarre and wacky and beautiful and creative, and you find things that you wouldn't find anywhere else. And I had the same experience living in New York. You walk outside and there's something ready to engage you at all times. So that I think it was less like a fantastical and more of a appreciating the bizarre in the current reality that's going on. So yes, you will see it in more pieces because I will set more things in New Orleans and embrace that spirit.
And perhaps that's why I was so drawn to it, because I love New Orleans so very much and feel it deep in my soul as something that calls to me. So knowing that that was partially the inspiration makes it make all the more sense in my mind why I want to just be in that world. Um, Bringing Nola the person back into the conversation to talk to you both. One commonality in your stories that you actually both addressed a little bit is that your main characters make some self-destructive choices in moments of anxiety and panic. It's like they're suddenly possessed by one of those urges to jump off a cliff, the call of the void, something that has always fascinated me. Why do bad impulses make for such good stories? And whoever wants to jump in first, feel free.
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say I've had the pleasure of reading the full story of Don't Choke, and I absolutely loved it. It was my first story I read from Morgan, and it blew my mind. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's always a pleasure to hear it. Um, I mean, it'd be hard to watch a movie where people are getting along for 2 hours. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think impulsive decisions, everyone does them, and it's what makes us human, and that's why we write, is to figure out more stuff about ourselves and why we are the way we are. Um, and so I think for me, that's what I like doing, is like, I've made impulsive decisions that make me think, wow, what was that? So I love putting that in a story and then making the character confront it, because it draws you in a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, totally agree. I think that like I also tend to write self-deprecating characters, characters carrying a little bit of self-loathing. And I know Nola's stories, like he tends to, or they tend to have this sort of, I don't know, like this undertone of like the characters might think they're doing the right thing, but the reader is like they're a little wacky. And I think it is fun to, sometimes we sympathize more with people who maybe aren't, Captain America's like these like perfect,
Yes.
ideal humans. When there's a little bit of character flaws, like that's what draws us to people. It makes them relatable. Yeah, so I think that's always a fun thing.
Always.
Yeah, I mean, if there's no conflict, then what are we here for? Where's the story if there's nothing, if there's no tension of any
We're
kind?
here for the drama.
Right, right.
Exactly. Um, so you both talked a little bit about this as well, and I know both stories were tweaked even just to be read for the Silver Room broadcast, but thinking about the larger versions, what challenges did you face when writing these pieces? I know you've talked about how they've gone through some revision. Do you expect more revision in their future? And just generally, what are your revision processes?
Yeah, I know one thing that I found really funny was so this piece was like I don't know, 10 pages. and cutting it down to I guess no, more like 20 pages. Cutting it down to 3 pages made me realize, like, did I need all those? Like, was all that necessary? But I feel like I got the point across. There's like a shortening of that build of tension, which I thought was kind of important to the full story. But I do think it was a great experiment, personally, for me to like forcibly shorten something and still make it understandable, and to give you as close to the same reader experience. So so that was really helpful and interesting to me to see how that worked.
I think that's a great point. I do the same thing where originally this piece was in email format. Like it was a bunch of emails and like stuff. And when I was doing my revisions, I did the exact same thing where I was like, did I really need all of that? Like it was like 22 pages. I'm like, I don't think that had to happen. But same thing with my revision process is I just have to rewrite until it ends up where it needs to be. But usually that's like a good 7 or 8 redoing it kind of thing. And just trying to hammer it out and I don't know, figure out where it's actually trying to go. I fall off the balance beam a little bit sometimes.
Well, yeah, and we're immeasurably lucky to have the workshops at the UNO.
Yeah.
Are like the feedback that you get from these very professional, like super intelligent fellow creative writers. Definitely all that feedback like I was able to channel that and get that into revisions, because you don't always know what lands and what doesn't land, or
Yeah.
so that was an incredibly important part of the revision process for me, for sure.
Yeah. Me as well, for sure. Yeah.
It is so hard to revise in a vacuum
Yep.
because you wrote the first thing and you know how and why it works. And if you can't get out of your own head to
Yeah.
reapproach the work unless you have a lot of time between when it was written and when you're revising, or if you've gotten some feedback from, again, like you said, the brilliant writers that we have in our program, that hearing what they have to say, even when I disagree with it, is invaluable, because it always is a piece that I can carry with me towards the next draft of whatever I'm working on.
Yeah.
So I have, as Morgan pointed out, I am a poet. I haven't written fiction in a while, but the characters were always my favorite part of writing stories. Talk to me about your processes for developing your characters. Are you starting with a particular character trait and then growing a whole character out of that seed? Are you building a character around a particular plot function? Do you see them or hear them in your mind first, then figure out the rest to fit that character? Just what is the character process for you?
I think it changes for me story to story depending on what it needs. I think plot function is always really interesting. I think just having that idea is really interesting. For this one, I had an image of kind of what they would both look like. So I actually drew both of them first just so I could have that like mental picture of what they're doing. I always do that with my characters, no matter where they kind of stem from, because I think that helps me figure out more, motivations and like what would they walk like and what would they say. And when you're doing dialogue tags, are they blinking every time, like that kind of thing. I think it's helpful for me to have that visual in my head, but yeah, that's usually my whole process.
Yeah. For characters, for me, yeah, usually I try to it'll often come first with voice. So the first like page or so is usually just me like just trying to figure out who's talking to me. What does their voice sound like? What do they need to say? What kind of words do they use? How do they feel about themselves and the people around them? So usually that like first couple pages is just like me getting into the body of the character, getting into the mind of the character. Like Nola, I do like have sources, like I'll look up like images that will kind of inspire me, or listen to music that'll be like, oh, like the sound captures the vibe of the character. So like finding inspiration in other little creative outlets. um yeah, that's usually, and then in the revision process trying to like, because often that's the thing that I want to hammer in more in like further revisions, is like, who is this person? and like really narrow in, like, you know, create these details around them that make them feel so real. Like I did want to say, like, in Nola's first piece, we never actually got a description of the characters. And so
Yes.
in the second, in this version, when we get a description of them, I was like that is exactly how I pictured him. And I don't know how, like, I knew that from, but just like the way that he was and the way that he acted, like, I don't know, having these like little character details come out of just like what you're writing, what's on the page and what's off the page, having that like all fit into place. I think that makes for really strong characters. So yeah, just trying to like find these different, continue to brainstorm, even if it's something that's not gonna make it into the story, just to know more about your character than the reader knows. I think it's always fun.
Oh man, I don't know that I'll be writing fiction again anytime soon, but you've both given me some really good ideas for how to flesh out my characters. That's wow, the idea of drawing them. That's very impressive. This is something that I have tended to ask most of the people who've come in to Silver Room, and we've already touched a little bit on what's been valuable about having like the workshop, where we can get feedback from our peers. But being that we're all in this program, what would you say is the most valuable thing you have learned so far? That like what's your primary takeaway from your time so far in this program?
I don't know if I can. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go? I'm like
No,
trying to
no, no.
think. Oh, okay. I don't know if I can pick just one. That's a hard one. I think that I've had a lot of. I have a document now that's like holy grail editing questions for me to ask myself, of just things people have said to me, whether it's developing characters or whether it's trying to like whittle down. I think a couple of them. One is like developing characters. I think we had this in a craft class, but it was what would your character have under their bed? And I think that was a really great way to think about how to develop them. That's really stuck with me. And then also just the fact of just because it works in real life doesn't mean it works in fiction. I think that has been a helpful thing for me when I'm going through all of my stuff. Those have really stuck with me for sure.
Yeah, all of that. I would say, yeah, the kind of what Julie was saying earlier, that like you can't really write or revise in a vacuum, as much as it is the temptation for this to be a solo, solitary process. It really, you do benefit from getting other eyes on your pieces, people who like understand what you're trying to say, specifically people who don't understand what you're trying to say and then like have different thoughts about it. Just getting all those different voices in the room, that's been really valuable to me, because I'm a very like tend to get like isolated, solitary, like, right, and don't come out of my hole. But it is really important to just like get different people's voices on it and eyes on it, and get that feedback. Yeah, I think that's been invaluable.
Great to know and great things even for me as a poet to be thinking about, whenever I'm doing like a persona poem, for example, or anything like that. But Nola, Morgan, this has been an invigorating conversation. Thank you for giving this poet a chance to think about characters, stories, and plot arcs again. You've certainly made me want to write, and I'm sure our listeners feel the same. Silver Room is going to take a break in January, but we will be back on February 1st with Rilver Wilkins and Terrius Jones. If you miss us in January, maybe organize a fun viewing party and go through our broadcast recordings with your friends. I think Silver Room would be a wonderful way to celebrate the new year. But one way or another, we will see y'all out there on the silver screen. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.